Desmond Ruiz had worked the lobby checkpoint at the county courthouse for 6 months, and in that time he had learned the rhythm of the place. The lawyers who came through at a trot, the jurors who came through nervous, the regulars who came through tired. He had not expected, on a gray Tuesday morning, to be the one called to testify. He sat in the third row of hearing room 2, his badge still clipped to his vest from the morning shift, and listened to Russell Combs explain, calmly, almost lazily, that the woman in question had simply not understood the rules. She came up after the window closed, Combs said, folding his hands on the table in front of him. I stamped it the way I stamp everything, 9:14. That's what the clock said. Desmond looked at the clock on the wall of hearing room 2. It read 9:41. He thought about another clock, the one above his own checkpoint, the one he glanced at 40 or 50 times a shift out of nothing but habit. He thought about 8:49 in the morning. He had not thought much about it at the time. It had been an ordinary morning, 3 months back, the kind that blurred into all the others, until the small, sharp memory of a woman thanking him, which not many people did, and the manila folder she carried against her chest, like it might blow away in the wind off the parking structure. There had been a line that morning, the usual pre-deadline crowd of people who left things until the last possible day, and he remembered thinking, at the time, that she didn't look like the rest of them. The others moved fast, irritated, checking their phones. She had moved like someone who'd planned this morning out the night before. Coat folded over one arm, the folder held flat, her shoes the kind built for standing in lines. Her name was Eleanor Pruitt. She was 71 years old, a retired postal clerk, and she had come to file an appeal of a lien the county had placed on the small house she'd lived in for 40 years. A clerical error, her attorney had told her, kind that gets fixed all the time as long as the appeal goes in before the deadline. The deadline was 9 o'clock. Desmond had checked her bag, watched her step through the metal detector, and logged her in at 8:49 and 7 seconds, the way the system logged everyone, down to the second, whether they noticed or not. Plenty of time, he'd told her, because she'd looked nervous, and she'd smiled and said she hoped so, and gone to find the elevator. Up on the third floor, at the civil filings window, Russell Combs had been having a slow morning. He had worked that window for 19 years. He liked to say he could tell, within 30 seconds, who belonged in his line and who was wasting his time. The ones who'd actually read the instructions, and the ones who'd show up with the wrong form, the wrong copies, the wrong everything, and stand there blinking at him like he was supposed to fix it. Eleanor Pruitt, in his estimation, was the second kind. Windows basically closed, he said, before she'd even set the folder down. People think they can just stroll in at the last minute. I have 11 minutes, Eleanor said. She didn't raise her voice. She glanced at the clock behind him, 8:51, and then back at him, steady. I checked in downstairs at 8:49. I can show you my receipt, if that helps. Combs didn't look at the clock, and he didn't look at the receipt. He pulled the folder toward him, flipped through the first 2 pages with the brisk, dismissive motion of a man checking a box, and said, not unkindly, in the tone people use when they've decided something is kind, "Ma'am, this isn't even the correct caption format. Did somebody help you fill this out? Because whoever it was didn't do you any favors." My attorney filled it out, Eleanor said. I'd like to file it now, please. He took it. That was the strange part. He took it, set it in the tray, reached for his stamp without ceremony, the way he'd done 10,000 times before, and brought it down. Received 9:14 a.m., untimely. He hadn't looked at a clock to do it. He didn't need to. In his mind, the matter was already settled. She was the kind of person who came in late, and the stamp simply confirmed what he already knew about her. He slid her copy back across the counter. I was here at 8:49, Eleanor said again, quietly, and for a moment something in her voice, not anger, nothing so loud as anger, just a kind of clear, level certainty, made the woman in line behind her look up from her phone. The stamp says what the stamp says, Combs said, already reaching for the next folder in his tray. Next. Eleanor Pruitt picked up her copy, folded it once, and put it back in the manila folder. She did not argue. She did not raise her voice or ask for a supervisor, or do any of the things people sometimes did at that window when they felt they'd been wronged. She simply said, "Thank you for your time," in a voice that managed to sound like she meant it, and walked to the elevator. 3 weeks later, a letter arrived at her house. Her appeal had been dismissed as untimely filed. The lien would stand. Back in hearing room 2, Judge Marguerite Eastman had been listening to Russell Combs for the better part of 40 minutes, and she had not once raised her voice either. She had simply asked questions about his training, about the courthouse's posted hours, about the stamp itself, which she had asked the clerk of court to bring up to the bench so she could turn it over in her hands, reading the small engraved date wheel like it might tell her something Combs hadn't. "And you're confident in the time you recorded," she said. 9:14. "I'm confident in my process, Your Honor," Combs said. "I've used that stamp for 19 years. "That wasn't quite my question," Judge Eastman said, "but let's come back to it." She turned to the bailiff. "Is the lobby checkpoint officer present? Officer Ruiz?" Desmond stood, surprised at how loud his own chair sounded. He hadn't known, walking in that morning, what this hearing was even about, only that the county's Human Resources Office had asked him to bring the checkpoint logs for the second week of March, and that 3 other names had been on the list of people called, none of which he recognized. It was only sitting here, listening to Combs describe a woman who'd come up after the window closed, that the date had clicked into place in his memory, and with it, the receipt printer's quiet whir and the woman who'd thanked him. "Officer Ruiz," Judge Eastman said, "you have the lobby entry log for March the 11th? "Yes, Your Honor." He'd brought it because they'd asked, not because he understood yet why it mattered. He passed it up. The courtroom was quiet while she read it. It was the kind of quiet Desmond would remember later. Not tense, exactly, just attentive. The way a room gets when everyone senses that something is about to be settled, one way or another, and nobody wants to be the one who makes a sound first. Judge Eastman found the line. She read it once to herself. Then she read it aloud, for the record, in the same even tone she'd used for everything else that morning. 8:49 and 7 seconds a.m. Pruitt. Eleanor. Checked through lobby security, escorted to no destination. Visitor, civil filings, 3rd floor. She looked up, not at Combs, but at the clerk recording the transcript, and repeated it once more, slower. 8:49, 7 seconds. She set the log down. "Mr. Combs, your filing stamp, the one this office has used for 19 years, the one whose process you're confident in, records Mrs. Pruitt's appeal as received at 9:14. The county's own security log, generated automatically, with no human hand involved, places her in this building, on this floor, 25 minutes earlier than that. 11 minutes before the deadline." Combs opened his mouth. Nothing came out for a moment. The stamp reflects when the document crossed desk, Your Honor. I can't account for." "You can't account for the 11 minutes," Judge Eastman said. It wasn't unkind. It was simply a fact, stated the way she'd stated all the others. Neither, it appears, could Mrs. Pruitt's appeal, which sat in your tray untouched, for 25 minutes while you attended to filings that arrived after hers. She let that sit. "Mrs. Pruitt," she said, and Desmond turned, along with everyone else, to look at the woman in the second row, small, in a gray cardigan, her hands folded in her lap exactly the way they'd been folded, he imagined, at that counter 3 months ago. "Is there anything you'd like the record to reflect?" Eleanor Pruitt stood. She did not look at Combs. "Only that I told him the time," she said. "I told him I'd checked in downstairs, and I offered to show him the receipt. He didn't ask to see it. I went home and I didn't argue, because I suppose I thought a court would look at the clock eventually, even if a man at a window wouldn't." She paused. "I'm glad to know I was right about that, at least." She sat back down. Nobody in the room said anything for several seconds. "You were right about all of it, Mrs. Pruitt," Judge Eastman said. "And I want that on the record plainly, so there's no ambiguity for anyone reading this later. Your appeal was filed on time. It was filed 11 minutes before the deadline, by your own diligence, and it was mishandled and mis-stamped after that point through no fault of yours whatsoever." She turned a page. "I am ordering that Mrs. Pruitt's civil appeal, case number 24CV1187, be reinstated nunc-pro-tunc, that is, treated by this court, exactly as though it had been properly received and timely filed on March the 11th, as it was. The dismissal is vacated. The clerk of court will see that the case is restored to the active docket by the close of business today." She looked now at Combs. "As for the conduct of this hearing's subject, this is not, the record shows, the first complaint of its kind against you, Mr. Combs. It is the 4th in 14 months, and it is the first in which the courthouse's own security records happen to exist to settle the question of fact. I have no reason to believe the other 3 were any less true simply because no camera or checkpoint happened to confirm them. Your Honor, You are placed on administrative leave, effective immediately, pending a full review by the County Personnel Board, Judge Eastman said. That review will consider not only today's matter, but the prior complaints in your file. My written order, with findings, will be entered and available to all parties by tomorrow morning. Bailiff, please see that Mr. Combs's courthouse credentials are collected before he leaves the building. The bailiff stepped forward. Combs stood slowly, and for a moment he looked toward Eleanor Pruitt. Not with anger, Desmond thought, but with something closer to confusion, as though he genuinely could not understand how a stamp he'd trusted for 19 years had been the thing in the end. That undid him. He said nothing. He left the way people leave rooms they didn't expect to be asked to leave. A little too carefully, watching the floor, Eleanor Pruitt gathered her cardigan and her small handbag, and as she passed Desmond's row, she paused. "You're the young man from the lobby," she said. It wasn't a question. "Yes, ma'am," Desmond said. I'm sorry. I didn't realize when I logged you in that it would." "You didn't do anything wrong," she said, and there was something almost gentle in it, as though she were the one reassuring him. "You did your job. You wrote down the time, and the time was the truth, and it sat there quietly for 3 months waiting for someone to read it." She adjusted the strap of her bag. "I found that's usually all the truth needs, somebody, eventually, to read it." She thanked him. For the second time in 3 months, though he doubted she remembered the first, and walked out into the hallway unhurried, the same way she'd walked to the elevator on a morning in March, when no one in that building had thought her arrival was worth noticing at all. Desmond sat a moment longer in hearing room 2, the checkpoint log still open on the table in front of the bench. 8:49 and 7 seconds, sitting there in plain black print, exactly where it had been the whole time. He thought about the line of people behind Eleanor Pruitt that morning, the ones who'd glanced up when she said, "I was here at 8:49, and then looked away again, the way people do, certain it was none of their business. He wondered, briefly, how many of them had a deadline of their own coming up, and whether any of them had thought, even for a second, to check the clock behind the man with the stamp. He gathered the log, squared its pages, and carried it out into the hallway, where the morning's ordinary business, the lawyers at a trot, the jurors looking nervous, had already resumed, the way it always did, the building running on toward whatever the next clock would say.